Okay, there's 40 minutes in your time slot. Deputy O'Brien.
And I'm sharing time, Chair. The bill before the House this evening, Minister, which will be debated tonight and tomorrow, sets out to amend the Education Welfare Act 2000 to enshrine in legislation obligatory anti-bullying policies that must be implemented on a mandatory basis by school boards of management in order that there are enhanced procedures in place to deal with bullying whenever it occurs at school. In order to inform the debate, Cathaoirleach, I think it's important at the outset just to talk briefly on the detail of the bill and what it sets out to achieve. The amendment to the Education Welfare Act, if adopted, will provide for binding mandatory measures to be imposed on boards of management of schools to ensure that the welfare of the child is adequately safeguarded in relation to all forms of bullying that may occur within the school. Section 2 of the bill offers an updated definition of bullying and includes reference to cyberbullying and some of the vulnerable at-risk groups that often find themselves the target of bullying. Section 3 amends the Education Welfare Act by introducing a new section in which the onus of responsibility is placed upon the Board of Management and the elected officer of that board to adopt and implement an anti-bullying policy in every recognised school. Section 3 of the bill also lists the procedures a Board of Management must adhere to when a complaint is made by a pupil and/or their parent, legal guardian, and/or when a member of staff knows of a pupil or any other person within the school which is being bullied. The new section also provides parents or legal guardians with the security of knowing the exact measures being taken by the Board of Management in relation to the individual case. It also ensures that regular and accurate communication is kept between the officer and the parent or guardian by enshrining into law set timeframes which must be adhered to. Section 4 introduces a new requirement on the Minister for Education and Skills to introduce regulations based on the existing guidelines which will have the effect of giving those guidelines in their current form legal status. The Minister will also be obliged to review those newly introduced regulations on a 2-yearly basis. This bill therefore introduces a legislative framework that should be implemented in conjunction with a whole school approach to bullying, which are underpinned by strategic interventions at a school management level. And as we debate this issue, I readily accept, Minister, that the bill we have published is by no means the finished article. There is plenty of scope to refine and improve its content, but I want to also place on record that this is a genuine attempt to implement progressive legislation that, if enacted, we in Sinn Féin believe will help protect pupils and teaching staff in schools across this state. There can be little argument that legislation in this area is long overdue. For 20 years, successive governments have failed to adequately address this issue, and it is simply unacceptable that the existing guidelines to help schools deal with bullying date back to 1993 and have no proper legal standing. The current procedures that are in place to deal with bullying in a school setting are at best an ad hoc solution to what is a very complex issue that manifests itself in many different ways. In 1993, school boards of management were handed the responsibility of preventing and countering school bullying, with little or no additional time or resources being allocated. This was an ineffective response to bullying in 1993, which unfairly burdens boards of management with a role that they were ill-equipped at the time to fulfil. It is a situation that was further compounded by the failure of government to properly legislate so schools have a clearly defined set of procedures in place to help teachers and management deal with this issue in a thorough and professional manner. We also need to provide a clear definition of bullying that reflects the changed nature of society in the last 20 years, by recognising the various forms it can now take, as well as the motivations that influence this type of behaviour. As I have already stated, Minister, bullying is a complex and difficult issue that can manifest itself in many different ways, and it can leave long-lasting physical and mental scars on its victims. At its worst, the physical and psychological damage to an individual can, as we have sadly seen in recent months, be a significant factor that leads to self-harm and or death by suicide. In recent months, the media have highlighted the awful tragedy of bullying-associated teenage suicides, clearly the worst possible scenario. But far more common, however, is bullying-associated depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, eating disorders and deliberate self-harm that all too often leads to truancy, absenteeism, early school leaving, and in some cases individuals being forced to change schools. The implications for teaching staff who find themselves the victims of bullying can be just as profound, and stress-related illnesses arising from bullying prevent many teachers from functioning properly and leads to enforced time off and disillusionment and frustration in the workplace. All of this takes a considerable emotional toll on the child, the teacher, the teenager concerned, and in turn has wider implications for the extended family circle and society in general. In many cases, there is also a direct financial cost to the state in terms of medical interventions and having to provide substitute cover for teachers out on sick leave as a result of the emotional distress caused by bullying. As legislators, we need to do more than pay lip service to what is happening in our schools, because words alone are meaningless without having in place the type of robust safeguards that protect the well-being of children and staff in a school environment. And I believe that this is something we can all agree to. We only have to examine the international best practice of other countries where they have applied evidence-based strategies in response to bullying in schools and the workplace to understand the importance of legislative reform. When considering this bill, we should also strive to achieve a coordinated approach to implementing reforming policies on an all-Ireland basis, because bullying is as relevant an issue north of the border as it is here in the 26 counties. I cannot overstate how important it is that we learn from the anti-bullying measures and procedures that have been implemented in other countries, such as Norway, for example, a country with similar demographics and population to Ireland, and who is recognised as being one of the world leaders in the way it has dealt with this issue. A key to that country's success was to ensure from the very outset up-to-date and effective anti-bullying policies were in place. Policies which were then underpinned by legal reforms made in the Norwegian Education Act of 2003. By adopting this type of strategic approach to the problem, experts such as Professor Erling Roland have concluded that the enhanced efforts made in Norway has led to decreased incident rates of bullying behaviour in schools. In short, it has had tangible and meaningful benefits to the health and well-being of children, young people and teachers, and is something we should seek to emulate. Closer to home, having an anti-bullying policy made mandatory in the 6 counties in 2003 helped to ensure greater cooperation between the relevant groups and people with expertise in this area, so that a more coherent strategy was central to the efforts to address bullying in schools. This was a significant step forward which has helped improve matters in that part of the island, and surely it makes a great deal of sense to expand this type of initiative and have both jurisdictions working together towards a common goal on an all-Ireland basis with clearly defined outcomes. Indeed, it is hard to imagine why a school must have an anti-bullying policy based on legislation in Belfast, but one in Cork does not. In the broader context, legislation on anti-bullying is important in establishing a healthy and positive school ethos. The UN Declaration on the Rights of the Child, to which Ireland is a signatory, states that children have a right to feel safe at school, which begs the question, if bullying is not effectively addressed, how is this possible? This, of course, opens a broader debate that we need to consider, because there is a good deal of evidence to show that young people learn what they see and experience in schools, as well as what is formally taught to them. Schools should be places of mutual respect and dignity, where people feel safe and free to achieve their potential as citizens. And when I discussed this bill with the various stakeholders, the response was positive in most cases, but there were some concerns expressed about implementing legislation around bullying. One of those concerns was that it may overburden teachers and board of management at a time when there is a scarcity of resources. And while I acknowledge the genuinely held concerns of those individuals and groups, especially when so many important frontline education services have been cut over successive budgets, I actually believe the opposite is the case. I believe having in place clear and precise procedures and regulations will greatly benefit teaching staff and boards management, as well as the children under their care. This is because, as most professionals working in this field will confirm, where there is confusion or a lack of clarity around the school's procedures in regard to anti-bullying action, then more time is spent wasted by students and staff as they attempt to deal with an incident whenever it occurs. The lack of clarity of clearly defined procedures ultimately results in a greater likelihood of conflict and anguish developing between the victim of bullying, their family on one side, and school authorities on the other, which can often make a difficult situation a good deal worse. Additionally, there is also the adverse emotional consequences for the victim of bullying and his or her family, because of the delay in dealing with the incident and the unnecessary stress that this can cause. The intention of this bill, therefore, is not to overburden schools, boards, principals and teachers. Rather, it is to help them in their work by providing the necessary clarity that is so important when dealing with such a complex and difficult issue. One of the significant flaws, in my opinion, in relying solely on the 1993 guidelines is that they were drafted before the advent of the internet and the social media. And for all its undoubted benefits that the internet and social media has brought, these tools provide a new and very invasive way for those who bully to target their victims. Within this bill, we have attempted to define the various types of bullying, because it is extremely important to be clear on what is meant by bullying and cyberbullying. To expect schools to be guided solely by a document drawn up in 1993 is inappropriate. We must update and extend our consideration to include the technological advances that have developed since. The question as to whether cyberbullying can push a young person too far is a moot point. Recent media reports have shown that this is the case. We have also attempted to define other at-risk groups in order to protect the targeting of people because of their sexuality or identification as a member of an alternative subculture such as goths, punks, skaters and so on. The fundamental ethos underpinning this bill is the safeguarding of children and assisting our already hard-working principals and teachers in undertaking this important work. It is an issue, Minister, which I'm sure you will agree transcends party politics, and it is of the most importance to every parent and educator in this state. Should the legal reform at the core of this bill be implemented, of course there will also be a need for this government and future governments to continue introducing measures to resource and assist schools in preventing cases of bullying. That is why we have included a section whereby the Minister for Education would review the proposed new regulations set out in the bill on a 2-yearly basis. This week's announcement by the Minister that schools will have to keep a formal record of bullying incidents and that patterns of bullying will be tracked and schools will be obliged to react is certainly a welcome one. It is long overdue development. The notion of mandatory reporting and plans to circulate a report template announced is a step in the right direction and has been linked to a similar successful procedure in Sweden. It is also a constituent part of the school's anti-bullying plan in the Norwegian programme known as the Zero programme, which, like the homegrown programme here in this state known as the ERIS Anti-Bullying Initiative, actually has far wider reaching sets of resources and procedures in place. And it's for that reason I'm calling on the government and opposition parties to support this bill, which, if enacted, will provide a legal framework so that there are clearly defined procedures in place to help teachers and school boards of management better manage the issue of bullying within schools. In conclusion, I want to quote Nelson Mandela, who in 2002 in his foreword to the World Health Organization's World Report on Violence and Health stated, "Violent cultures can be turned around. Governments, communities and individuals can make a difference. We owe our children, the most vulnerable citizens in society, a life free from violence and fear. We must address the roots of violence. Only then can we transform the past legacy from a crushing burden into a cautionary lesson." Minister, the culture of bullying can be turned around. We must address the root causes of bullying, and only then can we provide children a life free from violence and fear of bullies. We need to act now to strengthen the laws so schools are better equipped to deal with bullying, and in so doing we will have provided enhanced protection for this and future generations of teachers and children.